bits of our blind spot sensor. I'll talk about some of the benefits of blind spot sensor technology, and then I'll go over some of the diagnoses or symptoms or scenarios where blind spot sensors can really be helpful. We'll do a quick demo that will show you the different modalities of feedback that the sensors can provide. And then finally, I'll talk a little bit about the advantages of blind spot sensor technology, which I refer to as alerting technology versus intervening technology. So we'll get into that in a bit. So to start off, a little bit about my background. So before I started Braze Mobility, I was a researcher for a pretty long time, over a decade. And my area of research was actually on smart wheelchairs. So I was looking at, in my PhD and my postdoctoral work, how we can use sensor technology to increase safe and independent mobility. A lot of my work actually in my research, at least initially, was looking at older adults and even with cognitive impairment. And so that was sort of my background, and really trying to offer opportunities for independent mobility, especially to some of those who might be denied because of safety reasons. And so that was really the bulk of my research. And then after over a decade of doing that research and just being really frustrated that there were no commercial technologies that actually addressed the problems, I founded Braze Mobility in 2016. And Braze Mobility really, in terms of my objectives in starting this business, was to bring over a decade, in fact, several decades of research from the lab into the real world. And so two of the main considerations in everything that we do at Braze is making sure that we incorporate the research and clinical evidence, as there is quite a bit of it out there. And secondly, to ensure that we are developing affordable and or fundable solutions, because often I see technologies developed in the lab that are great and really sophisticated, but are too expensive for anyone to be able to afford. And so those are really the two things that we include as criteria in everything that we design here at Braze. This is just a snapshot of some of my publications in the field, which is a small proportion of the work that's actually been done in the area of smart wheelchair research over the last several decades. So the reason I like to show this is because although the technology that I'll be sharing with you today is fairly novel and innovative in the industry, I just want to share that there has been several decades of research that's actually been done. Unfortunately, the industry is not often very familiar with this work. But it's part of my mission to help bring and translate a lot of that research and to share that knowledge with industry. And hopefully, right now, while this technology is very novel today, my hope is that in the near future, we'll be seeing this technology as much more standard on wheelchairs in the future. So that's myself. And my background is on assistive technology and robotics. While my background is in computer science and sort of the technology aspect of it, I did also do my postdoctoral research in the Department of Occupational Therapy. And so I do have a lot of experience working with clinicians and really understanding what the needs are from a clinical perspective. My co-founder, Dr. Alex Mihalaides, is also cross-appointed in engineering as well as occupational therapy. He is a internationally recognized leader in aging and technology. He is both a professor at the University of Toronto as well as the head of the AI and robotics lab at Toronto Rehab Institute, and is actually someone who lives with incomplete spinal cord injury. Terrence, who said hi earlier, is our head of partner success, and he has experience working with customers in both the assistive technology sector as well as aerospace. And so he brings that experience with him, but he's also a family caregiver to his brother who uses a power wheelchair. And so really brings that caregiving lens to the company as well. David is our head of engineering and is in charge of all things related to product, especially if you have any questions around product support, then David is typically the one that you'll be dealing with. And Alan is an industry veteran. A lot of the people in industry recognize him as someone who was the managing director of Promobile in Canada, and that's where he came to us from. And so he manages a lot of our manufacturer relations as we are trying to work very closely with the manufacturers to incorporate our technology into the chairs. And then we have wheelchair users who are part of our extended team and that really drive a lot of our decisions and design of our systems. So in terms of the problem that we're trying to solve, we have seen in reports that nearly a fifth of power wheelchair users and scooter users have experienced at least one major collision within the past year. And these sorts of collisions often result in damage to the mobility device, as well as potential hospitalization. We also see a lot of property damage. And so this is a very conservative estimate. We've seen estimates as high as over 50%. And the reality is that at least, in going to people's homes, especially when they use power wheelchairs, it's quite common to see that that their homes are quite damaged in terms of their walls and driveways and so on. And so we really want to try to solve this problem by coming up with a solution that could help increase safety and independence. So what are the Braze blind spot sensors? Essentially, our system is a set of ultrasonic sensors, not very different from what you already might have in your cars. And the idea is that these sensors can be attached to any wheelchair, transforming it into a smart wheelchair. The system detects obstacles in the environment and then provides feedback to the user through 3 different types of modalities: lights, sound, and vibrations. And in doing so, we're really empowering the user to navigate their environment safely and independently. The system can be mounted to any wheelchair, whether it's power or manual. And within power wheelchairs, we can also accommodate, seat like elevate and tilt and recline and standing features. The system is also highly customizable. I won't have a chance to go through all the customizations today, but we'll certainly speak to a couple of them. And we did that in order to really be able to have the system adapt to our clients' individual needs. We know that no 2 clients are alike, and so we wanted to build a system that could really adapt to the client's needs and their environment. And really kind of the bottom line here is that the system is recommended for any clients that you might have in mind or might be working with who want a greater spatial awareness of their environment. In terms of the benefits then for the end user, our blind spot sensors increase independence and confidence by providing this customizable multimodal feedback. And for caregivers and institutions, our sensors can reduce property damage and also increase safety for not only the user, but others in the environment as well. In terms of where our sensors are currently being used, they're currently used at home, in the community. We see them in long-term care, assisted living, a variety of environments. And while the sensors are used outdoors, we find that they're predominantly used indoors to help navigate in tight spaces like elevators, doorways, narrow corridors, ramps, and so on. The other really neat thing about our sensors, especially with the auditory alerts that we'll be demonstrating, is that they can not only alert the wheelchair user, but others in the environment. And we saw a really neat application of this during COVID, because we had some clients initially saying that they didn't even know if they were social distancing from others, because they couldn't tell if someone was sort of sneaking up from behind them or kind of walking behind them, and they weren't quite sure if they were maintaining that social distance. And so the neat thing about our sensors is that you can actually adjust the distance to 6 feet and have the alert set up that way, so that you essentially have a social distancing tool that will beep if somebody gets within 6 feet of your chair. So that was a really neat application. In terms of the populations we serve, the age range is quite wide. So we see clients anywhere that are like 6 years of age to 90 plus. So we do have a pediatric population that we serve. We also serve a big veterans community. In fact, we have a pretty large collaboration with the Department of Veterans Affairs that we're very excited about, and has been ongoing this year. So we really, part of this is also because of my background with individuals with cognitive impairment. We really try to apply those universal design principles to our system. And I think as a result have been able to design something that's simple and intuitive enough for individuals to use regardless of their age and even, cognitive ability. So we do have individuals who might have mild to moderate cognitive impairment that can still respond to our system. So why should you care about our technology? Well, if you look at the cars that we drive, we use mirrors, we use rear view mirrors, we use side view mirrors to understand what's going on around us. And it's unfortunate, but mirrors are really not practical to mount on a wheelchair. And so if you're a wheelchair user and you really do need to see what's around you, sitting in this office chair, I can't really see what's behind, on the floor behind the wheelchair. And so add to that any sort of upper body mobility or dexterity issues can make that task impossible, or extremely challenging. So really the need for that additional awareness is high, and mirrors really don't provide a practical solution to that problem. And if we look at more recently what's happened in the automotive industry, a lot of our cars now already have sensors that have been mandated in the automotive industry. So the question really here is, why shouldn't wheelchair users have the same right to peace of mind and safety? So then in terms of who can benefit, really any wheelchair user can benefit, especially if they're in a power wheelchair. We know from even very recent research that rear visibility in a wheelchair is very low, and people are pretty much just guessing what's behind them. And so I would say for any wheelchair user, and especially power wheelchair user, at least having that the sensors in the back can be very beneficial. But in addition to that, I've also outlined some sort of some of the diagnoses or symptoms that could benefit from the system. So if you've got clients with low vision or legal blindness or spatial neglect, the sensors can help with that awareness. If they've got limited upper body or neck mobility, so again, that range of motion issue, not being able to do a shoulder check, this justification is really a strong one, because if you think about the justification for power mobility, a lot of times we justify power mobility for individuals who are unable to self-propel in a manual chair because they have those, upper body mobility or dexterity challenges. And so then justifying the blind spot sensors is actually in alignment with justifying their power chair, because we're saying, hey, they don't have that dexterity to be able to operate propel a manual wheelchair. And so they need a power wheelchair, but then also that means that they're not going to have very good spatial awareness, especially in the rear. And so they could benefit from the blind spot sensors as well. So those justifications work really well together. And then finally, if you've got a client that maybe is generally a good driver, but just has some attention issues, perhaps they just need an alert that will help them attend to the driving task better. Those are all situations where the sensors can be really beneficial. But in addition to the client's needs and abilities and diagnoses, I also would urge you to think about the technology that they're using. So their wheelchair, the configuration that it's in, other sorts of accessories that they might be using. For example, if they're using alternative drive controls, head array, sip and puff, eye gaze, those devices actually require the wheelchair user to face forwards when they're driving, which means that we've actually compromised their spatial awareness, especially in the rear and the periphery. If they're driving in a tilted position, again, really difficult to see to the sides and behind. If they're driving with things on their wheelchair that could occlude their vision, so things like ventilators or backpacks or communication tablets or extended leg rests, all of those things can really hinder in their ability to see what's around them. So those are all also great reasons to have the sensors to kind of increase that spatial awareness. And then finally, in addition to the client, their technology, the last thing, of course, to consider is their environment. So if they're driving in a space that's not wheelchair accessible, maybe their homes are not wheelchair accessible, maybe the workplace or any other areas that they're trying to access are not wheelchair friendly, then the sensors can really help in getting in those tight spaces, as you'll see in some of the videos that we show. This is just a quick slide that I'm not going to get into too much detail, but it's a fantastic, really comprehensive article that was written by Dr. Rit Simpson back in 2008. And so these numbers are fairly old, but the numbers since then have only increased. And I think it just shows that the need for this technology has only increased since then. But even back in 2008, what Rit Simpson did was broke down, he took about, I think, 8 different diagnoses. I've just highlighted 4 of them. But what he did was he looked at, for all of these diagnoses where an individual might require a wheelchair, he looked at the different symptoms that might mean that client can really benefit from smart wheelchair technology specifically. So as an example, with spinal cord injury, he estimated that over 66,000 would need a wheelchair, and this is both power and manual, and up to 100% of that population has limited head and neck movement, which then would mean that they could benefit from smart wheelchairs. So in doing this for across a bunch of different diagnoses, he estimated that up to 91% of manual and power wheelchair users can benefit from smart wheelchairs. So this is a great article because at the time, the thought was that smart wheelchair technologies could really only benefit a very, very small proportion of wheelchair users. And what he showed in this article was that, in fact, this technology is could benefit, almost all, if not, the majority of wheelchair users, and that its uses are actually quite widely applicable. So I'm going to pause right there. I'm going to go to do a quick demo for you. So Terrence is going to pull up his demo unit and show you how the system works.
Can everybody see this okay?
Are we able to,
Yes.
I can't seem to spotlight him, but if someone can spotlight him, that would be great.
Let's see.
You're spotlighted on mine, but hopefully.
Yeah, Terrence, you need to say something to come up to the foreground.
Okay.
Are you able
Everyone see
to,
me?
are you able to just pick the spotlight on him? That way it'll always be on him.
Well, I'll just start, and then if you could find the spotlight thing, you could
I
spotlight
know we
me.
can individually pin presenters.
You could do that too, yeah. Well, so I'm going to start here. So what you see here is just a handheld portable demo unit, but these are of the main components of our most popular kit, which includes 3 components. So the first is this large sensor, which we call the Sentinel. The second component is a smaller sensor, which we call the Echo Head. And the third component is the controller. So with the first component, the Sentinel, this is our large sensor, and this provides a 108-degree horizontal coverage and 45 to 55-degree vertical coverage. This large sensor unit is typically mounted in the back of the power wheelchair, typically mounted on the power base, then providing the back coverage. We do have kits that would use 2 of these large sensors, and these kits are, thanks. These kits are typically meant for legally blind or low vision clients, where then you will also have a large sensor, the Sentinel, also mounted in the front, providing the forward coverage. But in our standard kit, it would include one that's mounted in the back. So that's our first component. The second component is our smaller sensor. This is the Echo Head. And in our standard kit, we would install 2 of these, typically mounted on the front casters of the power wheelchair, pointing diagonally forward, so then provides the forward coverage. And this sensor has a 45 to 55-degree cone coverage. So that is the second component, the Echo Head. And then the final component is the controller. And so the controller provides the option to turn on and off the system. You could toggle between the modes. You could turn on and off audio feedback, and you could turn on and off the vibrational feedback. So that is the controller. And this is typically mounted beside the joystick of a power wheelchair. So I'm going to turn the system on so you can see it in action here. Okay, so right now you'll see one blue light. And so what that means is that the system is on and it's in mode 1, which we call short range mode. And so what that means is that for any obstacles detected within 2 feet, the client will receive a warning alert. And any obstacles detected within 1 foot, the client will receive a danger alert. So in terms of light feedback, warning is a yellow light and danger is a red light. So you'll see that on the controller, there's 3 rows of lights. The top row would signify any obstacle detected by the forward-facing sensor. So in this case, it'd be the Echo Head. And then for the bottom row would be for any obstacles detected by the backward-facing sensor. So in this case would be the Sentinel. So I'm going to move the sensors closer to my computer right now. So as you can see, the sensors are now picking up my computer, and my computer is now within 2 feet. So you're seeing a yellow light. And then if I was to put my hand, say, in front of the large sensor, within 1 foot, you'll see that there's a red light because my hand is now in front of the large sensor. So that is how the light feedback works. there is a second mode, like I mentioned. So if I was to toggle the power button, you'll now see 2 blue lights. And so now it's in mode 2, which we call long range mode. And so what that means is that all the distances are automatically doubled. So now warning is 4 feet, danger is now 2 feet. And how we typically see our clients use these 2 different modes is that mode 1, short range, would be used at home or in tight spaces. And then mode 2 would be used in, say, public spaces like at school or at the shopping mall. So those are the 2 modes and light feedback. And the distances I mentioned for the 2 different modes are just system default, meaning that depending on the needs of your client, they could be easily adjusted through our smartphone app available on Apple or Android. And you could adjust the distances from as little as 2 inches all the way up to 6 feet. So that is light feedback. So now I'm going to turn on audio feedback here. So there's an audio feedback switch. And then if I'm going to turn the system back on now. So right now I'm going to move, as you can see, in warning, there is no audio feedback. Audio feedback will only be activated in the danger zone. So there, and as Pooja mentioned earlier, we typically see our clients liking the audio feedback less for themselves, but more for others in the environment. So I'm just going to toggle that off. And the final feedback modality is vibration. So I'm just going to toggle the vibration module here. And we have these vibration modular pads. So you could install up to 3 of these. So you would typically install one on the left, center, and right. And you could put these either in the backrest, seat cushion, or armrest. So what this does is that, for example, if a client was to say move towards a door and they get too close to the left of the door frame, the left pad would vibrate. If they get too close to the right of the door frame, the right pad would vibrate. So this then provides this tactile feedback that's discrete. So a lot of our clients really love to use the vibrational feedback, but it is an optional add-on, as we do want to ensure that our clients don't have spastic reaction to vibrational feedback. But so yeah, so these are the 3 modalities, vibration, sound, and lights. I'm just going to turn that off here. And just so you know that this system is a USB powered device, meaning for any power wheelchair clients that you may have, as long as they have a USB port on their power wheelchair, you can just plug this in and it fully powers the system. For any clients that may not have a, say like a USB port and is a, say like a manual wheelchair user or a power wheelchair user that doesn't want to draw power from their system, we do have these battery packs, which I don't have it in front of me right now, the same ones that we use to charge our mobile phones with. So a fully charged battery pack can then power the system for 10 to 12 hours. And then for any power wheelchair users that would like a USB hub, we also provide a XLR adapter that then also has a USB port on it, that then you could plug in this to then power the system. And yeah, so this is our system. And this is fully flexible and adaptable to any power or manual wheelchair. Any questions for us?
Yeah, does it handle drop-offs at all? Censoring drop-offs. Sensing.
Great question. Great question, Michael. And Pooja will be talking about that shortly. Pooja, you're muted. Are you still muted, Pooja?
Oh, weird. Sorry.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yeah, there you go.
So I will be talking about that in a little bit. The short answer to that is no, it doesn't detect obstacles below the ground, but I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing in that in that particular area of development. So let me bring back up my slide deck here and I'll go over everything in terms of what it can and can't do. So a few more points around customizations. So as we've been talking about, the system is highly customizable. It's one of the biggest strengths of the system. And some of the examples, I think there's probably over like 20 customizations, so I can't go through all of them, but just a few highlights here. The app for customization is called Braze Connect. It's free for Android and iPhone. You can download it, but you can't really use it unless you have a system because it does pair to the system automatically. And on the right there is a screenshot of just what that main menu looks like. It's been designed to be incredibly intuitive and simple. We've had end users, family members, therapists, ATPs all use the app and find it really, really easy to use. And so, we've designed it that way. In terms of some of the things that can be customized, for example, if you have a client that is sensitive to the brightness of the lights, you can adjust the brightness. If you have a set of client that is colorblind, you can adjust the colors. So the red, yellow, and blue colors that show up on the controller can all be changed, and there's a list of colors you can pick from. You can even change the way in which the feedback is offered to the user. So for example, we had a client that said, I only want audio feedback for rear obstacles, and I want vibration alerts for obstacles in the front. You can do that by just turning on and off the different types of feedback modalities in the rear and the front. And then, of course, more important, I think, than any other customization is the distance customization. Why is it so important? Because depending on the environment that the user is navigating, if you only have a fixed distance, it's not particularly useful because maybe they're in a really, really tight space, or maybe they have delayed reaction time and actually need the alert to come earlier. So it's really important to be able to fine tune those distances to the client. And we are able to do that. The distances can be customized anywhere from a couple of inches to 6 feet. So there really is that a range that can be picked, and it can be done independently for all of the sensors. So you can have a different sensor distance setup for the rear versus the front or whatever. So a lot of adaptability there. And it's, once again, really, really, this was a key feature. And something that's missing if you take a lot of the off-the-shelf sensors, for example, in the automotive industry. If you try to just take that and slap it on the chair, you're going to have a system that's just alerting all the time, and it's just not going to be helpful to the client. Okay. So in terms of durability, our sensors are not waterproof, but they are about as water resistant as the chair itself. What that means is that the system can withstand splash. So it's okay if there's water that kind of splashes into the sensors, but they will likely fail if they are submerged in water. So you can't take the sensors out for a dive. And then also, while we don't guarantee that the system can withstand all temperatures or climates, we have done fairly comprehensive testing. In fact, we had the system being tested by users in the community that were essentially stress testing it for about a year in various different weather conditions, from extreme heat to extreme cold, including rain and snow. And we hadn't received any complaints for sensors failing in those sorts of weather conditions. So we're fairly confident that it is robust. Now I'm going to jump to the case study section. So I'm going to show you some clients and how they're actually using our sensors, so you can start to kind of, have a mental picture of what your clients might, some of the challenges that they might have. So the first customer here is Phil, who is a veteran with ALS, traumatic brain injury, and legal blindness. And he was a long-term power wheelchair user, but unfortunately, a few years ago, he started losing his vision. And when he was just as he was starting to lose his vision, he was navigating in a hospital hallway and ended up crashing into a baby stroller. Luckily, there was no baby in the stroller, but this really was traumatic for Phil, and it really hurt his confidence. And so he was looking for a solution that would enable him to maintain his independence with his power wheelchair. And that's when he discovered our solution. We worked with him as well as his therapist at the Minneapolis VA to really be able to adapt the system for him. Phil ended up being our first client that used the Sentinel 360 setup. So that's the setup where he has a Sentinel in the rear doing the 180 in the rear, as well as the Sentinel in the front that gives him that 180 coverage in the front, since he is legally blind. He uses all 3 types of feedback: light, sounds, and vibrations, although the vibration alerts are his favorite because they give him that tactile feedback without needing to look at something, and of course he has legal blindness. So the tactile feedback is very advantageous for him to have. And so this has really helped Phil to be more independent, even in his own home, where he used to need caregivers to help him navigate down the hallways and into his pottery room where he does pottery. He's been able to do all of that now independently, as well as go out. In fact, he traveled alone for the first time to another VA where he was doing some white cane skills training, wheelchair skills training, and was able to navigate a completely unfamiliar environment with the help of the sensors and the white cane. On that note, for anyone who does have legal blindness, we strongly recommend the use of our system in conjunction with the white cane. It's not meant to be a substitute. And because the reason for that is, of course, the white cane is probably the best tool we have for drop-off detection and surface changes, like, differentiating between grass and concrete, for example, which is, again, very important to ensure the client doesn't get stuck. And so we heavily advocate that the client uses the white cane with the sensors. They're very complementary. The sensors often detect things that the white cane doesn't. For example, Phil used to have his white cane sweep right under a car, not realizing there was a car there, while the sensors would pick up the hood. And then, and vice versa, where the cane picks up things like drop-offs where the sensor doesn't. So we really do, we do recommend that they're used in conjunction. This is a case study or that was published in the 18 newsletter that's published by the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. So this was their spring newsletter a few years ago. And they talk about the whole experience that we had in working with Phil and how he got his system and how we got it all working for him. On the bottom right, there is an image with Phil using an older version of our app, which actually required him to type things in. But Phil's was, despite being legally blind, was still able to use our app. And of course, the new app is even more user-friendly. But this is an example of one of our clients that is able to make those adjustments themselves, especially when he went into that new environment where he went to the other the Heinz VA for training. This was now a completely different setup. He was in a different housing space, and so he was able to adjust the sensors for that environment. The second client here is Katie, quite a bit younger than Phil, a head array user. Again, very, very, in her case, very skilled head array user, I might add. But one of the specific challenges she was having was backing through a doorway, which she sometimes needed to do. And what would happen is, because she didn't really know whether she was centered in the doorway, she would end up kind of doing, shoulder checks back and forth, inadvertently activating her head array, which then would mean that she was zigzagging through the doorway, doing a bunch of damage in the doorway as she went through. And so her therapist reached out saying, is there any way we can help Katie to align better in the doorways so she can go through without doing all this damage? Now, Katie was such a fast learner that within 30 minutes of training, we were able to get her to back through a doorway without doing any damage. And the way she was able to do this was use the visual alerts to look for whether she was centered and aligned before going through the doorway. So she could come out in front of the doorway, look for that alignment, use the audio alerts as well as the visual feedback to get her centered, and then all she needed to do was pull straight back. And you'll see how that alignment is done in a video that I'll show you with one of our clients going through a doorway, so you can see how that would work. So Katie loves the audio alerts. Her parents love the audio alerts, not just for Katie, but because the audio alerts were also helping her peers at school recognize that Katie was close and that she needed her space to maneuver. And we find that quite often is the case with a lot of our clients going in and out of elevators. Really, it's the feedback is not just for them, but also for others in the environment to give them that space that they need to maneuver. This next client is perhaps one of our greatest success stories, as highlighted by the long-term care staff. And the reason the staff mentioned this particular success story was because Betty was a long-term care resident at that facility, was also a long-term power wheelchair user, but they were starting to see some damage in her bathroom. They were getting nervous about her in the dining hall with other residents. And so she was identified as someone at risk of losing her mobility device. Luckily, before they took her power mobility device away, they contacted us because they'd already seen success with our system with some of the other residents in the facility. And so we went there, we did a trial with Betty, and after configuring the system to work for her, she ended up purchasing it. Within 8 months of her getting the system, I went back to the facility, and it was really, really incredible, the kind of changes that they'd seen. So first off, before she got the system, the facility had really restricted her driving indoors, as well as prohibited her from going outdoors altogether to the mall, which was something that really brought her a lot of joy. And so there were a lot of those restrictions. Since getting the system, all of those restrictions have been eliminated. Betty was now navigating independently in the home, as well as going to the mall, which really impacted not only her her independence and mobility, but also her quality of life and her moods. They were seeing that she was smiling a lot more and just saw such a tremendous positive outcome from having her keep her independence. And I think that really goes to show how important, what a huge role independent mobility actually plays in helping people maintain a high quality of life, and the fact that we really should be doing everything we possibly can to keep people in their power chairs for as long as possible. Just to give you a little bit of insight into how the system was able to make such a difference. And this is often, you know, some of the things that I think a lot of times staff might not really know what's going on. And I've often seen this, especially with my background with working with individuals with cognitive impairment. Unfortunately, when there is an underlying diagnosis of any sort of cognitive impairment like dementia, when accidents like these start to happen, people might automatically jump to the conclusion that it's, you know, some sort of a decline, cognitive decline, whereas it might actually be a lot simpler than that. So in Betty's case, it wasn't the fact that she was no longer able to drive or that she didn't have the cognition or the judgment. It was really as simple as when she would go under the bathroom sink, she had a very bulky custom footrest that was made for her that would just not allow her to see the end of her feet. And so when she'd get under the sink, she'd end up doing damage to the walls underneath the sink. So having these sensors installed around her footrest meant that she could now tell how close she was getting to the wall and stop before she did any damage. Similarly, in the dining halls, having the sensors meant not only that Betty would have that feedback if she was getting close to someone as she was backing up, but it also meant that the other residents in the dining hall knew when Betty was getting closer, if she was wanting to back up. So they could you know, be a bit more cautious around her as well. So this is really just a great example of how our sensors can really benefit everyone in the environment and to help maintain that safety. This is the last case study here that I'll show, and this is Wade, who is a very active manual and power wheelchair user, travels a lot nationally, internationally. He's a business owner. And so he really wanted something that would help him navigate in his home, which was really not a very accessible space. So I'm just going to show some really short videos here to illustrate how the system helps him in his home. I'll play through this first video here, which is Wade navigating from his bedroom out into the hallway, which is a very awkward space, as you can see there. You might even notice the paint's gone in the front of the video there. Baseboard's missing, which is the kind of a common theme throughout his house, with a lot of the baseboards ripped out. And so you'll see him now navigating from in that very awkward space with a front wheel drive configuration, which adds even more challenges to this particular task. But he's using the visual and vibration feedback. So he feels the buzzing in his backrest and uses the lights to maneuver here. Oh, sorry. I'm just gonna have to pull that again. Any questions in the meanwhile? And I am also getting to the part about some of the other things that the system does not do. But let me just quickly pull this up again. Sometimes it just needs. All right, here we go. I'm just going to make sure this video plays. Okay. Again, here we go. And so as you can see there, Wade was able to navigate, he's able to navigate really smoothly through what is a very awkward space, saved him a lot of property damage, and also saved his wife from needing to hear him swear constantly, especially in the middle of the night when he has to go to the bathroom. Okay, so this is the last video here of Wade in his kitchen. Again, another really tight space, and you'll hear Wade talk about how the system helps him. The only note to make here is that he'll talk about a red and a green light. The green light that he's talking about is the same as the yellow warning indicator that Terrence showed you earlier. Wade actually did have some color blindness, and so we had to adjust the colors for him. But he's talking about the danger and warning, the red and the yellow lights, when he's referring to the colors of the lights.
Usually when I come into my kitchen, I have extreme problems as it is. It's a tight space. It was never designed for a wheelchair, but being in a wheelchair and being that I like to cook, I have to come into my kitchen. And doing so, as you can see, it's a very tight space. And having to drive in leaves me no alternative but to drive out and back out. As I'm backing out, it is impossible for me to be able to see the doorway behind me and to see the handle that is on this fridge, which, by the way, has been torn off this fridge a number of times and glued back on. But with this device, I don't even have to look behind me or try to look. I just look at the light system, which right now is giving me 3 green lights, and as well as vibrating pads that are in my back are telling me as I back up, if I am in the center of the doorway, as long as none of these lights turn red, I know that I am centered and I am not going to hit anything. As well, there's vibrating pads in my back. If I am looking straight ahead and not at the lights, if I'm carrying something or as I'm coming out, it will warn me. So if one of the pads, the left one goes off, I know I'm about to tear the handle off my fridge. The right one goes off, I know I'm about to hit this doorway, which already has no paint left on it. And so as the lights stay green, I back out. And as you can see, I am not hitting anything. I am coming straight out through the door. And even though that is such a tight space, I've made it without touching or damaging anything.
Okay, so just a few points about the different configurations that we have. So Terrence mentioned the Sentinel, which is the 180-degree sensor. To the Sentinel, we can add up to 3 echo heads as additional sensors. So the smaller echo heads can be added to the front of the chair, as Terrence mentioned, or perhaps even in the rear at the by the headrest in case you have clients that are drilling holes in the wall because they're reclining or tilting too far back. But then we also have a configuration called the Hydra. Now, the Hydra is just a black box where you can plug in a bunch of echo heads. Why would you use this? Say you have a client that really just needs a couple of areas of targeted coverage. Maybe they've got spatial neglect and they don't really drive, back up too much. They just want one side covered off with a couple of sensors. Then the Braze Hydra would be a more cost-effective solution. So we do have that as well. And then the vibration modules, of course, are an add-on. If the client doesn't have any spastic reactions to vibrations, then we can add those on, and we can add up to 3 for left, center, and right. This is just some visualization of what some of our kits look like. We do have quite a number of kits, but this will give you a good idea as to what some of those kits look like. So the first one is called the Hydra Duo, which, as the name suggests, is a Hydra kit with 2 echo heads. This might be a configuration. What you're seeing there with the yellow cones is where the sensors see. So this might be a good setup for someone with left neglect, for example. The middle one is by far the most popular kit. It is the Braze Sentinel Plus kit, which is Sentinel plus 2 echo heads. So that covers the rear and the peripheral on either side. That runs around $3,000 MSRP. So most of the kits that we sell are typically between $2,500 and $3,000 for either the Sentinel, the Braze Sentinel basic package or the plus package. And so what that means is we typically do see a lot of coverage in terms of funding. We have had a lot of state Medicaid coverage across the country as well. So we really try to kind of keep it within that range where it is potentially fundable. The last kit there is the 360, which is one that Phil, that I mentioned earlier, who's legally blind, has both the 180 in the back and the front. This is just some pictures of what it looks like. Since you're seeing this, you don't have an opportunity to see it in person yet, and we're happy to make that happen as well if you would like to see it in person. But this is what it looks like. The controller is typically mounted close to the joystick, and then the Sentinel is placed on the power base. This is an example of the system on a manual wheelchair. So this was actually a real install for a client in a skilled nursing facility who was having some trouble in navigating his manual chair. We have the Sentinel there, as well as the 2 echo heads on his front casters. The controller has been mounted with a clamp kit. And you will notice that our sensors and all of our components have GoPro compatible mounting, which means that we have a lot of different options for mounting. We have clamps, we actually have hard mounts as well, but for GoPro, we have clamps, Velcro, strap, adhesive, you name it. There's a bunch of options. And this particular one is being powered by a power bank because, of course, a manual wheelchair doesn't have a power source. So it's just got an independent power bank that it's using. And then finally, this is a Hydra setup on a manual chair. So this is 3 echo heads there that you can see under the handlebars and on the backrest. And then in this case, the controller has been mounted with a gooseneck clamp because the client wanted to be able to quickly clamp it on and off because he was wanting to travel with it and it wanted a really portable setup. So again, these are just some of the funding sources. We have seen a lot of success with state Medicaid and then different types of commercial insurance, Office of Folk Rehab, etc. Our system does not detect curbs. So right now, the commercial system does not detect obstacles below the ground. But I do want to mention that this is technology that we are working on. In fact, we have a massive national collaboration with the VA where we have multiple sites engaged. We've been doing this collaboration throughout the year and it'll go on for the rest of the year. And so we are closely along with the VA and veterans developing a technology that will help with things like alerting in the case of drop off. So we'll definitely keep everyone posted on that. And we are hoping that we will have a technology that will be able to alert to that as well. And then lastly, our technology does not in any way control or stop the wheelchair. We do not interfere with the wheelchair electronics. This is really, really important from a safety liability perspective. We don't want to take over control. We really want the user to be in control of like whatever they're wanting to actually do with their chair. All we're doing is providing that feedback so that they can make more informed decisions. There's a lot of reasons why we don't have this sort of intervention in our commercial system. We do, however, have a training tool that does have that sort of technology that can intervene with the chair. But before I show you that, I just want to, again, highlight some of the reasons and some of the caveats with that sort of technology versus something like the blind spot sensors. So with the blind spot sensors, which I call alerting technology, the user's completely in control. All we're doing is supplementing with them with existing, supplementing the existing information they already have with this extra information. And so we're informing both the users as well as others in the environment so that everyone can act more appropriately. Now, with intervening technology, so technology that might slow down or stop the chair, the main issue with this technology is that even if temporarily it takes away control from the driver. And the issue with that is that it can cause potential confusion and or accidents and or frustration. In fact, there is a whole body of evidence, and a lot of it is actually evidence that I published when I was doing my PhD and postdoctoral work, which was actually all in the realm of intervening technology. And so I have a lot of experience and clinical evidence that shows us that there are a lot of limitations with this technology that we really need to carefully consider when we're looking at what sort of clients that we want to provide this technology to. And so unfortunately, the kind of clients that can most benefit from intervening technology are clients with severe cognitive issues or severe motor control issues, who then might not be able to identify if a malfunction has occurred, or even if they do identify that a malfunction has occurred, might not be able to override the system in time or at all. And so unfortunately, that is a paradox and and really a limitation of this technology and who it can be used with. And finally, the sort of technology, no matter how sophisticated artificial intelligence is today, it still cannot predict the intent of the user or others in the environment. So it can't predict if the user is actually wanting to get closer to something, or if it's perhaps safer to crash into a cardboard box rather than that child. Those are the sort of decisions that these sorts of systems really aren't capable of making. And so for all of those reasons, we have not commercialized that sort of system that will intervene. However, we do have that technology developed. We are making it available as a training system. And so just to quickly show you what that might look like, really straightforward. Essentially what is happening is our system will detect obstacles and then provide feedback, but if the person doesn't respond, it will automatically slow down and stop the chair and prevent the user from moving towards the direction of the obstacle. So it is modifying the speed and then only allowing them to drive in open areas. So that's what that system looks like. It is available for research and training purposes, but not as a commercial system. And then finally, we do also have some apps that I won't talk about too much, but we have some apps that can help you if you do have a client and you're wondering about whether our Braze system the blind spot sensors are appropriate for them, or that whether your client would respond. We have some apps that can help with that, and you can use those as a way to perhaps gain some information about whether your clients might respond to the system or not. And if they don't, there are some training modules there that could potentially help with that. So that is the last app there. That's Braze. And that's all I have. Just, if we in a minute, what I will do is summarize a very, very interesting study that was published in a third-party peer-reviewed article last year. And the real brief summary of this study was that it was done with existing power wheelchairs, older adults with power wheelchairs. And what was done in the experiment is that they were asked to identify objects in the rear, different kinds of obstacles, and they were asked to identify them with and without sensors. And what the study showed, and I will only show you one of these results, which is incredibly powerful and is both statistically significant as well, is for obstacles that were low to the ground, clients were only able to detect those rear obstacles with an accuracy of 44% without sensors and 96% with the sensors. Their time to detect those obstacles was also significantly faster, 7.3 seconds without the sensors and only 2.6 seconds with the sensors. And so the kind of summary of the study was that clients were able to detect obstacles with significantly more accuracy and significantly faster than without the sensors. So that's all I'll say about the study. You can, we're happy to give you more information if you'd like to read more. But I think this was really a great validation of the fact that, with that poor accuracy that you're seeing there, 44, some of the results were really low there in kind of 40s and 50s. Really, these are existing power wheelchair users that are just guessing what's behind them. There's really not much there in order to help them identify what's going on. So the sensors really do make a significant difference. All right, and that is it. So let me just go to contact information here so you have that for your reference, and I'll take any final questions if you have them.
Yeah, so Ian mentioned in some states, like Anthem Blue Cross will pay for it, Medicaid will pay for it. Is there a insurance funding code or DME funding code? Like, where does this fit into?
It's just KO 108.
Okay.
It's KO 108 or E1399. And really the kind of justifications, we've seen some very, very simple justifications go through. And really, one thing that we talk about a lot is to really focus more on the independence aspect rather than the safety, because ideally, your clients aren't getting power wheelchairs unless they are demonstrating a basic level of safety, right? So while it can enhance safety, you really want to actually highlight the independence aspect of it. The fact that maybe they can now drive in certain areas without their caregivers or without attendant control, navigate certain spaces of their home, which otherwise they might not have been able to. So I think that's really what we generally recommend to focus on. And we do want to make sure that everybody who is using the system, is actually capable of operating a wheelchair safely, right? Because if they're not capable of operating a chair safely, like as I mentioned with some of those issues, with the system, there's no system that's going to be 100% in terms of safety. So if they can't actually operate the wheelchair, then we're putting them at risk of accidents. And we just don't have the kind of technology that's accurate enough to be able to actually make them a safe driver. So this is not really trying to make a bad driver a good driver. It's more about making an already good driver a safer driver, and perhaps giving them more independence.
Okay. Does your sales team assist patients in writing justification letters? Like, are there example justification letters or?
Yeah, we do have some samples. Yeah, absolutely. We have some samples, we have some guidelines, so we're happy to help with that. In fact, we recently had a deck put together as well with some of those guidelines, so we can certainly assist with that. How do you generally work with, I guess, if you had clients that would need the system, would you be purchasing directly? Would you be kind of recommending and going through dealers? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, our staff will evaluate and recommend technology for people. We don't pay for any of this stuff. So if it's a child, they would probably be in Medicaid or go through like a children's rehab program. Adults could be vocational rehab, could be a Medicaid waiver.
Exactly, waiver.
So we have a variety of funding streams, but oftentimes that funding issue is left up to the patient or the consumer. And so
So I
for
know with the
something, if we're talking about a $3,000 device, if that's what the person needs, it's what they need to be safe at home, but they're going to need assistance with getting the funding for that. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I can tell you, at least with the dealers that we work with, like we work with the nationals, like NewMotion and NSM, we're actually partnered with NewMotion. And so I know with anything that goes through them, they handle all of that, and they have their own kind of, because they've done so many of these now, they also know what works and what doesn't work. And so they have also their own guidelines that they're using, and they're also training their own ATPs on that justification. So that's what we also usually don't really get involved with that. I mean, we collaborate with our dealers and therapists, and again, provide suggestions, but the dealers are usually doing the bulk of that work. And like I said, I mean, NewMotion now is probably the most experienced dealer when it comes to this technology, because we've been working with them the longest, and they've certainly had the most number of their clients that actually use our system, and they've gone to a bunch of different funding sources. So they do a pretty good job of justifying it.
Okay. What kind of training is available for the consumer or the patient to learn to use this? I saw Terrence had posted some links to like apps, but like what's actually available? You're talking about a population of people age 67. On average, they're not a lot of app users, in that population group.
Yeah, so most of our training is done. We do training in a couple of different ways, I guess, different times. One is when we're doing the trial. So with trials, often I will get involved depending on, the client. If it's a more complex case and we feel like there might need to be a lot of configuration, I will get involved. Some of our users find it so straightforward that, within maybe 10 minutes, they completely understand what's going on and they are able to use the system. With others, it maybe takes a couple of weeks. So I wouldn't say, it really depends on the client, obviously, and their cognition and, their learning ability. But we do provide some training during the trial. So when they're trying it out, we'll show them how it all works so that they're comfortable with it and they, want to move ahead. And then at the time of installation, once again, either we'll come in remotely or whoever it is, the dealer that we're working with, will typically also provide some training at the time of delivery. So they'll show them how everything works. We have a user manual. And then at any point, if they want to contact us, we are also available through a number of different ways, through our phone line. We have a video call, like an automated booking support link where people can just book video calls with us and we can go through training there as well. So we know that different people have different styles of communication. And so we've tried to kind of put it all out there. Like we've got our web chat, we've got our phone numbers, we've got video calls. So hopefully with all of those different communication channels, we'll be able to provide whatever training the client needs. And then of course the in-person support through our dealer partners.
Okay. And so how does technical support work for you?
Typically through the dealer partners, they would be the first line of support. If there is anything, they will often also collaborate with us and bring us in. If it's something that, is out of their realm, then we'll definitely come in. But right now, again, because a lot of these folks are still working with our technology, have really just relatively recently gotten introduced to it, we do take on a bigger role when it comes to support. But they're definitely the first line of communication. So usually our clients will first reach out to the dealers, and then the dealers will go in, kind of schedule the time with them, and then bring us in there as well. So they'll book us at the same time. So we'll offer remote assistance here from Canada, and then the dealer partner will be there in person. But that's why we also partner with the dealers, because then they provide all of that support. If there's any replacements or repairs and all of that, they take care of all of that as well.
Okay. And what sort of support do you provide for training for orientation of mobility specialists who they're going to be doing the light cane training? This is a new tool for them. They're not familiar with it, but it sounds like something that could be useful. What do you do? Is there outreach or formal training available, or is that on a one-on-one basis? Or
really, I mean, I would love to just get all of them in the same, forum. I do a lot of workshops as well. I do kind of, different workshops on customizations and that are very case sort of kind of like in the form of case studies. So for example, you've got a client with X, Y, and Z needs, like this is the kind of customization you would provide, right? So it's very user-centric. And so I can do that in a number of different ways. I can either, if you've got a group of them that you would like me to train together, we can set up like a 1 hour, 90-minute workshop just like this, and I can do a training in that way. If they are wanting one-on-one support, I also have, again, we have a lot of these links that we can provide you with that literally if any therapist ever wants to do any training with me, they just have to go on the calendar and click a time that's convenient for them, and they'll get a video call, a Zoom link to go through training with me. So we're very accessible when it comes to education and training.
Okay. Are there trial or loaner devices available to try with consumers?
So there are some demo units available through our dealer partners. We have some facilities or organizations that will purchase demos. Like we've had a lot of lending libraries, for example, that have actually purchased demos to make available as loaners. So there's a bunch of different ways in which we can work with you. It just depends on if you've got your own budget, then there is potential for us to get you your own demo unit. If not, then we have some folks. So if where you're based out of, we could easily work with our New Motion ATPs there and get someone from there to do trials with you guys. And we'll work with all of the dealers. We're not exclusive, but we have a partnership with New Motion where they actually have demos at all of their major branches. So it's just easier to get a hold of them and get a hold of demos through them.
Does anyone else in our team have a question?
I do, and I may have missed this because I had to step out, so I apologize if you haven't repeat yourself.
No problem.
What is the vertical range of the sensors?
Sorry,
for example,
what is the what range?
The vertical range of
vertical,
the
okay.
sensor. So, for example, I have a client who has run her face into the side of a tall lab counter. Also, the boxes that are mounted to the wall for fire hydrants. Fire extinguishers, I mean. Is there a way that you can increase the height range of the sensor so someone doesn't run into things at face level, or would you have to mount the sensor higher up on the chair?
Yes, the latter. So the sensors have about a 45 to 55 degree vertical cone that they see, and then the Sentinel has about 180. The individual echo heads have like a 45 to 55 degree cone all around, right? So basically each of these, if you notice, the Sentinel is just a bunch of these little sensors, right? So each little sensor has about a 45 to 55 degree horizontal and vertical range. And when you put them all together like that, that's how you get the 180. So there are, depending on where you place it, as long as it's within the sensor's view, then it'll pick it up. So if you, we had an example of a client who had the Sentinel kind of lower to the ground, and that eliminated, about like close to 90% of the collisions that they were having, but they still had 10%. And we asked, where are you still bumping into things? And he mentioned it was sort of like this high coffee table that he would back into. And so then we just placed one of these echo heads on his headrest, kind of pointed down, and that resolved the issue where then he wasn't bumping into anything anymore. So we can also, and I really do recommend doing this, is when you're looking at a client, is ask that, where are they having collisions? What are they having challenges with? Are there specific blind spots? Do they have neglect? Is there, areas, maybe something's hanging off that's really covering their views? I will literally walk around the chair and look for damage. Like if there's a lot of front caster damage or, damage in specific areas of the chair, then I know that that's probably where I need to place the sensors. So we've definitely had sensors, especially those small ones that are modular and are designed specifically to be placed anywhere. Those are the kinds of areas we'll place them in. If for example, we've had clients that have done a lot of damage and scrape their elbows. And so we might have echo heads that are kind of around their armrest, so that they're kind of looking out in that area. So that answers your question.
Yes, thank you. And I know you mentioned mounting options. So do y'all have mounting arms that or like 12 inches or whatever that can raise it up?
Yes, we have gooseneck mounts. So, and when you're filling out the order form, we will actually ask about that. Like we'll ask, do you need us to, mount, for example, the display further away from the joystick so that it's more visible to the client, and so that way we know that we need to give you some extensions so that you can put goosenecks and so on. So, yes, lots of variations in the mounting, and so we'll usually ask you those questions, and then we'll supply all of the mounts that you need based on what the setup for that client is.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, one neat thing about also the GoPro is we also recently discovered that a lot of the RAM mounts also have GoPro adapters. So so what that means is with a lot of these things that you're mentioning, like a lot of these gooseneck mounts, if they're available through RAM, then we can get sort of recommend the RAM GoPro adapters, and so you can basically use any RAM mount also with our components. So we're kind of compatible with RAM, but then we're also, or with GoPro, but we're kind of indirectly also compatible with RAM because RAM has GoPro adaptable mounts.
Okay, anything else? Any other questions? All right, well, we have your contact information, so thank you, Pooja and Terrence, for coming by and talking with our engineering and AT staff. We appreciate learning about your product.
Thank you so much. And thanks for all the great questions and for being a great audience today. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
All right, thank you.
Thanks for having us, Michael.
Thank you for coming by.
Bye.
All right, Stephen, you're